Hello and welcome to another edition of No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin. While the electoral losses are mounting and the polls are continuing to drop and cabinet ministers are fleeing, along with half the crew that works on Parliament Hill. So today, a quick scan of the political landscape and the public mindset with Darrell Bricker from Ipsos. He is the CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs, a senior fellow at the Munk School of and Public Policy at the University of Toronto, and the author of at least 7 books. Have I got that number right, at least?
You are correct, Senator.
All right, let's just jump in. I was reading a line from Paul Wells, which I thought was great, that he was now, as a journalist on Parliament Hill, spending his time analyzing Justin Trudeau's Stations of the Cross on the long, slow road to defeat. I thought it kind of captured it, where we just keep going through a stage a day or a stage a week. Is that how you see it?
Yeah, it really is. Once the Tragically Hip had a great song called "Boots or Hearts," and it's like boots or hearts, when they fall apart, they really fall apart, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's what's going on here. Yeah, it's well and truly over, and it's really now it's just a question of acceptance. So it's more like Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages of grief. I finally
Yes.
have to get to acceptance, and that's really where the prime minister is. Now, I'm
Yeah.
supposed to say, as somebody who's an impartial observer of what's going on, that anything can happen,
Correct.
which is true. Anything can happen, but what that anything is does not seem to be in the control of the government.
Yeah.
So it would be something that the opposition parties do, maybe an external event, something can happen, but there's nothing from a policy, messaging, pursuit that the government can do that can really change this situation around.
I was listening to a discussion about that yesterday because everything is going on. I mean, we're seeing even the longtime allies of the carbon tax fleeing the province of British Columbia, all of these things. So if the Prime Minister and Stephen Guilbeault woke up tomorrow morning and said, you know what, we've been thinking about this, you're all right. We're just going to end this carbon tax thing and take away Mr. Poilievre's Axe the Tax theme. Would that help even?
Well, the funny thing is, no, but the reason is because it's not really helping Pierre Poilievre either. It's not like the reason that people want to have an election is to axe the tax. Yes, I mean people would prefer not to see a carbon tax, but the reason they want to have an election is they want a change of government.
Yeah.
It's not about having an election to do a specific policy thing. They want to just change the government. It's not the policies, it's not the messages anymore. It's
Yeah.
really who's doing it. And what's happened is that the Liberal government, and particularly the Prime Minister, have basically become fingernails on a chalkboard.
Yeah.
And every time they stand up and say something, it just irritates people. And when you're in that kind of position, it's very like I really don't know anybody who's turned around that kind of situation.
This has always been the party that has, well, in addition to being considering, at least themselves considering that they are the natural governing party, they have represented the Laurentian elite, that kind of pathway from downtown Montreal to downtown Toronto. Now they have lost 2 key by-elections in those 2 hubs, not to mention Manitoba. So if that breaks down, then that suggests there is no path back, and that it's also going to be extraordinarily hard to figure out where you find your starting point to rebuild.
Yeah, there's it's very difficult to say. Now, if you're a political strategist and you're working on the situation for the prime minister, and you've gone out and you've done your polling, I'm sure they've got some questions somewhere deep in some survey that shows that there's something there that they can pull on, a string that they can pull on. Usually, for the Liberals, it relates to the calamity that will follow the election of a conservative government. So they feel they probably have that, but this time around, it's just not there. It's
Yeah.
kind of like Stephen Harper in 2008, in 2006. It's just okay. We've heard all the bad things that you're going to say, but we're willing to take a risk on just something new. We want 75% of Canadians say that they want somebody else running the government. That's the same. On the other side of that is the same percentage that's voting for the Liberal Party. So it's like they've got this core of a quarter of Canadian voters that are interested in voting for them, and just nobody else.
So this whole notion, and we've seen it from the prime minister since the party all gathered, the government all gathered in British Columbia. He's kind of come out with his rocky image, and somebody actually suggested they were playing the music at the caucus retreat, and the tough guy, the slinger, and really tough words for Poilievre. Um, Again, you're just saying that's not enough, too little, too late.
Well, first of all, what Justin Trudeau is up against is not Patrick Brazeau
Yeah,
or Apollo Creed. He's up against a young Mike Tyson, and it's called time for a change.
yeah,
It's not even about Pierre Poilievre. And this is the dilemma that they find
yeah,
themselves in. It's really not about the people that they want to go after. It's the public. It's not like there's a huge amount of appeal uh, that relates to a specific policy agenda that Pierre Poilievre has put out. Basically, what it is somebody who he's become the one person on the ballot that actually represents change
hmm,
outside of the province of Quebec. I mean, in the Bloc Québécois, I think is in a certain position to represent the same kind of thing in the province of Quebec. But outside of the province of Quebec, I mean, that's what Pierre Poilievre is. He's change. And so the problem with going after, a policy issue or about making about him personally, he's just a vehicle for this. He's not.
yeah,
He's not somebody that Canadians have embraced with great affection the way that they embraced Justin Trudeau in 2015.
yeah,
In
that's
fact,
right.
his profile is more like Stephen Harper was in 2006, which is, make it stop. This is the one guy I can vote for that's going to make it stop. That's why I'm going to vote for him.
There's so many other factors underlying all of this. I don't know whether you guys do, but a lot of the political analysts refer to this as the normies, the normal people out there that are just sick and tired of this government, of politics in general. They're watching the United States chaotic system election unfold there. They just want government to kind of get out of their face and, get their plastic straws back so they can have a drink. Like
Yeah.
it's just like stop this madness for most people. Do you get a sense of that in the polling you're doing?
It's less about that and more about the specific anxiety people are feeling about their own
Okay.
futures.
Okay.
So it really is the personal struggle that people feel that they are going through in order to just make it through the week and make it through the month. And so while the identity politics stuff is interesting for journalists and for academics and for people who are hyper interested in politics to talk about, or specific green policies are maybe interesting for people to talk about, most people are really just interested in how am I going to be able to afford my mortgage? How am I going to be able to afford my groceries? How are my kids going to be able to make progress beyond what I've made in my life? So that's what they're really focused on. And that's what's really driving support for change. And as I said before, the only
Yeah,
possibility of change on the ballot, since the NDP gave away their ability to represent themselves that way, is Pierre
exactly.
Poilievre and the Conservatives.
By
So
ripping up
that's
the deal. Yeah.
what people are reflecting
So
what's
when
going
they
on in their
try,
day-to-day lives.
so when the liberals try to counter program or put out a counter narrative with something like, take your mortgages to 30 years and let the young people get in and get in debt for longer. It's not a policy I think is great, but it doesn't change the message on people's fears about that or anxiety, as you say.
Well, Pierre Poilievre came up with a very interesting phrase that kind of captures how people are feeling these days, and that's that Canada's broken.
Hmm.
Not that Canadians are broken, but Canada as a functioning country is broken. And it's not that people feel like the idea of Canada is broken or that they individually are broken. It's just that those things, those systems that we have in our communities, the things that we used to rely on, the things that we used to see as, our values being respected and all that, that is all being challenged. And that what used to be easy now seems to be hard. What used to be seen as, base standards in terms of personal behavior now,
Yeah.
people color outside those lines. So they're kind of just floating in this sense that things are just not working the way that they need to. Now, whether Pierre Poilievre can get them working is another question.
Yeah,
But at
that's
the
almost a
moment,
separate issue. Yeah.
they're two separate things. So what this is a reaction to the general mood of the country. And I've watched the Liberal government push back on this, and I think a reasonable person would do what they're doing, which is to say, you know, it's not as bad as you think. If you actually look at our unemployment rate and you look at it historically and you look at our interest rates and you look at it historically and you look at our inflation. My favorite was Christopher Freeland, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, saying, inflation is down within our band of acceptable, whatever she called it in the House of Commons. It's like, what are you saying?
No, no, exactly.
To go out and argue with people, you feel bad and you have no right to feel bad,
But
is
that's
not
the
a great
message
message.
we've been hearing since, well, for a while, but certainly since their meeting in British Columbia, which is there's no problem here. Canadians just aren't engaged enough, or you're not understanding how good we are for you, as one said yesterday. I mean, this is blaming the victim in a whole new way in a political context.
Yeah, and, that's one way of putting it, and I think some people are probably taking it that way. I think another way of putting it is you're just not listening.
Yeah.
And this is one of the issues with this government. I mean, and it's basically the character of the government. It's like, I'm going to fight on everything.
Mhm.
I'm never going to admit that I'm wrong. I'm never going to change. I'm just going to fight it to the end. And then maybe after it's died down a little bit, I'm going to change it, or I'm going to do something halfway
Yeah.
different. So on immigration, it starts off with it isn't a problem. It's the most wonderful thing so we're gonna ramp up all of this immigration, and then things get out of control and people start reacting in ways that normal. It's interesting on immigration. Most people are pretty accepting of immigration, but when you give
Yeah.
them a reason other than racism to be opposed to immigration, like the effect on the cost of housing or other public services or things
Healthcare,
that they see in the
education.
street, and you give reasonable people a reason to be opposed, then they're gonna be opposed, and that's what's happened. So their initial reaction tends to be, oh, you're wrong, or you just don't understand,
Yeah.
and then the next reaction is, well, if you feel that way, you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And the problem is that good people are now feeling that way.
Yeah.
People who normally be labeled that way are feeling that way, and this is what they're up against.
That speaks to the broken part because, we've heard from the bureaucrats, the people inside, that they put up the red flags, the warning flags, and said, look, you can't double for all intents and purposes the number of people who are not, existing citizens in this country and not expect that there's going to be an impact on housing and healthcare and education. And now we're hearing the premiers really push back publicly and saying you can't send temporary migrants, people here who are on temporary visas without, at the very least, you have to send the money, but actually we can't handle it anyway.
Well, and people, need to appreciate. I don't want to say understand because that sounds like
Yeah, yeah,
need to appreciate that. Canada is a really big country, but over 90% of immigrants go to our major cities.
right.
So actually, our major cities are actually quite crowded.
Yeah,
Now, it's interesting. It's not actually our downtowns, although some of this is sticking to the downtowns. It's our suburbs. It's our
yeah,
commuting suburbs, where most of the growth is taking place. So, yeah, these are really, issues that people can see with their own eyes in their communities. And to come out and tell them you don't understand is like saying, well, actually, you don't understand.
yeah,
And you can see that the government, after a long period of time, kind of says, maybe we need to do a bit of a correction. They never actually say we were wrong about that, but
right.
it it comes off as, oh, we're going to make a new adjustment or whatever. Doug Ford is an interesting counterpoise to this because he's the exact opposite of Justin Trudeau because he's an incredibly transactional type of politician who doesn't have strong beliefs about, any ideology. He's not an ideological person. He may have certain
Yeah.
certain predilections, but he's not a person who has a baked-in worldview. So he encounters something that's a challenge. He says, "Is this worth the fight? If it's worth the fight, maybe you'll fight it. If it's not, oh God, can't believe that we see." That's what
Yeah. I
Canadians
made a
want.
mistake. We're not doing that anymore. Yeah.
Justin Trudeau has never said he's made a mistake.
Yeah.
He's apologized on behalf of Canadians.
Yes. Repeatedly.
Yes, but
Yeah.
it's never anything that the government itself has or the government he's leading has done wrong. And all of this over the space of 10 years accumulates. And so when somebody says, "Okay, I'm going to change now after 10 years," it's like, yeah, that's a little difficult
Probably
to
not.
accept.
See, that's that gets to this authenticity question that everybody is, focusing on these days. Because when Jagmeet Singh says, "I've changed my mind about the deal," or "I've changed my mind about the carbon tax," everybody goes, "No, you haven't. There's an election." Or if David Eby says, "I've changed my mind about this," they go, "No, no, you're having an election in BC." But but because Ford has kind of been consistent in that part of his personality, people seem to be willing to say that is a guy that's willing to change his mind, but there's no evidence on these other fronts that there's ever been a willingness to do that.
Yeah, and there's certain things that he is bloody minded about, like there's obsession with alcohol in corner stores and things.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
on many issues, like particularly things that you could label as scandals, he's backed off very fast.
yeah,
Whereas Justin Trudeau digs in, on the We scandal, on foreign interference, on anything that you want to go through, they've really dug in, and it's accumulated over time
yeah.
into a collective personality for the government, and the public's just fallen out of love with it.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
and so that's where they find themselves. They find themselves in a very deep hole. They not only are they keeping digging with shovels, they've brought in backhoes and they're digging furiously, making the
Yeah,
same mistake. And so inevitably they're going to put themselves in a position where this government, the future of it, is really in question. And minority governments go down for one of two reasons. One of them is by design, and
yeah,
that is a party thinks it has a real advantage, particularly a governing party has a real advantage, and they engineer their own defeat. And then the other reason they go down is by accident.
yeah,
And Joe Clark in 1980. And this government could go down either way, but the
yeah.
likelihood that it's going to make it to October 2025 is probably fairly remote now.
Let's just go down that path a little bit. I want to come back to some of the issues again, but we might well have a confidence vote in the next 7 days. I mean, the Conservatives have said they're going to do it. I mean, we don't know what the result will be. There's, the common wisdom is the NDP doesn't really want an election right now because they can't afford it. The Bloc Québécois says, I don't want an election because we don't want Pierre Poilievre any more than we want Justin Trudeau. So it's not in our interest. And besides, we're going to line up at the gravy train and use our power to extract money and programs from the government, much as the NDP has done. Everybody assumes the Liberals don't want a campaign now because the Prime Minister wants to stay on. But I'm wondering if that's true. I'm thinking of, that would, if somebody forces his hand, that gives him a face-saving way to go out. It also allows him to campaign in the midst of the U.S. election against Trump and against all of those things that's his strong suit when he's railing against that. So do you see, like, which side of the argument do you see them coming down on? Hanging
I
on
don't.
or going for broke?
I think that they're going to go for broke and play chicken with the opposition to a certain extent. I
Yeah.
don't think that they're ready for a campaign.
Yeah.
I don't know what the financial situation is. That would be something worth checking in on.
Yeah.
I wonder how their fundraising is going right now. I can't imagine that it's too good. But the the ability to construct on a vote by vote basis some sort of a coalition on specific policies does provide them with an opportunity to think a little bit and maybe maneuver some things for a little bit. But does it change the inevitable place that we go to? No. I think the NDP um, is doing now what they should have done prior to the last budget, which was to and like still I'm at the time I remember writing, and probably it was even on your show talking about, or your podcast on
Yeah.
talking about, now is the time for Jagmeet Singh to become Jack Layton
Right.
and actually get something for supporting the government. He got nothing, but now all of a sudden
I know.
he's decided to walk away. He's got a puff of wind in his sails. They won the election in Manitoba,
Yeah.
which probably less as a result of him and the NDP and more as a result of a very popular provincial premier Wab Kinew.
Yeah.
But you can explain it any way we want, but they still won. And that's good news for them. So they've got a bit of momentum. Somebody is going to be the progressive champion on the ballot. This is the NDP's chance to surpass the
Yeah.
Liberal Party. They're not going to get a better one. So they should vote. They should actually vote with the Conservatives to knock off
Yeah.
the Liberals. And as far as the Bloc Québécois goes, I mean, they absolutely want to campaign against Justin Trudeau. So
Exactly.
there's every reason for them to vote for a non-confidence bill or non-confidence motion. So both parties actually have a reason to do it. Now, the only problem that they've got is it looks like they're supporting Pierre Poilievre, which is probably a difficult thing, and they'll give the
Right.
Liberals something to do with it. The Liberals are a spent force. They're not going to be reviving themselves during the course of a campaign. That'll go how the campaign is called, and you know this well, Senator, since you've reported on them for many years and you've been around them for many years. What caused the campaign to start, with a couple of exceptions, almost never defines how it ends.
Yeah. Exactly right.
We move on to, I mean, the last campaign, though, in Canada, how it started really did define how it ended.
Yeah.
Uh, Justin Trudeau had no reason to call that election campaign, was going after a majority. It was very obvious, and Canadians really hated it from the start. Now, he
Yeah.
ended up scraping by with another minority government, but that was one case in which how the election was called did have an effect. But I think that, there's an argument to be made. I'm not saying that I have any superior knowledge of this or my political tactics are any better. They may have all sorts of reasons that I don't understand as to why they wouldn't do this, but you can see a pathway through to thinking that they should actually vote with the Conservatives and force an election campaign. One of the things that I do hear a lot from people is, well, there's no better leader to lead the Liberal Party than Justin Trudeau, and there's nobody else. It's like, well, because you haven't tried.
Yeah.
You haven't
Well, and the
tried.
longer that he carries on, the more cabinet ministers leave. And, the Mark Carney Dance of the Seven Veils here, I mean, he's clearly made it, this comes to another question I want to ask, but, he's not going to sign up at this point. He's going to wait till there's a clear path and the mess is behind them, presumably.
Well, we're both fans of the military, so I'm going to use a
Yeah.
military analogy with all apologies to people who don't like military analogies. And it's a First World War military analogy. So Justin Trudeau's out there talking about he needs Mark Carney in the trenches.
Yeah.
I mean, very clearly quoted. Mark Carney took the most Chateau General approach that
Yeah.
you could take
Yeah.
to participating in political combat that anybody could. He's 50 miles behind the line in a chateau looking at maps.
Yeah.
He's so far away from the trenches that he's not a factor. And good on him, because that's
Yes.
probably the right thing to do. You want to be far enough away that you don't go down with the ship, but close enough that you can maybe do something with it afterwards, which would be more of a naval analogy. But that's really what he's done. I mean, talk about the least commitment that you could possibly give.
Yeah. And still be in the window and still have your name in the news every day between now and the time that you might actually consider putting your hat in the ring as a leadership contender. The other thing that this issue does, and I know it's been raised in the House of Commons, but the more that the Prime Minister courts Mark Carney and talks about how we need somebody to lead us on the economic front, the more he undermines Chrystia Freeland in a very kind of direct way. I mean, you have a finance minister, and if you're looking for another one, and that's kind of another one of those issues, which is the strong women in that cabinet that have disappeared over the years.
Yeah, and she's all in on this, right? I mean,
Yeah.
she's made a career commitment to doing this, and has had some really senior jobs in government. And yeah, you gotta wonder how all of this works. And for her to say, I consult with them too, it's like,
Yeah.
that's a bit of a strange thing. And I don't want to diminish Mark Carney's accomplishments as a public servant and
No, no, I mean,
as a
he's a brilliant
person
guy.
in
Sure.
business. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And he did beat me for the Donner Prize on
Oh, in the
for,
book world. Okay.
I have very bitter feelings about Mark Carney. No, actually, I have a lot of respect for, and he wrote a very interesting book.
Yeah.
But this guy is not a retail politician.
No.
This guy is a Lester B. Pearson dollar
Yeah.
a year man. I mean,
Yeah.
he's not like the only people whose hearts he make flutter, are people who have an MPA from Harvard.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like I don't get it. It's not like people are looking for somebody from Mensa. It's
Yes.
not like people are looking for somebody who's going to, teach a graduate seminar. They're looking for somebody who can actually connect in an authentic way with the feelings that they have. And I don't see that in him. Maybe he does have it in some reservoir that he hasn't exposed to the Canadian public. But the
I
idea
haven't
that he's
seen it.
any salvation any more than Michael Ignatieff was,
Yeah.
yeah, I just find interesting.
It also raises the question because I was going to come back to the Canada is broken theme because what we were hearing every day in, the end of the last session up till June, we heard it even over the summer, the conflicts of interest of which, Mark Carney's now in that category taking on this job and he's, got big corporate interests like Brookfield and can he really juggle these two things and keep the priorities straight? The foreign interference issue and the refusal to name names, the conflict and mess in the Environment Department and the handing out of green funds, which have just exposed conflicts of interest everywhere. I mean, all of this stuff feeds into that notion that you say Canadians are actually feeling in whatever way they interpret that, that it's just not working. You don't know how to govern the systems. This all started with you couldn't get a passport. All of those issues that you've kind of lost the ability to govern, and there's too many questions about special interest and trust and all of those things breaking down.
Yeah, and all of this is the weight. It's like in Indiana Jones, the big ball that kind of chases him
Yeah,
down in the opening scenes. It's kind of like that, but you can also add in an even bigger ball, which is just that sense of personal frustration that relates to just what it takes to get by on a daily basis. So the
yeah,
problem, yes, I mean, the problem with the ethics of the current government is something that's dogged them since SNC-Lavalin and has never gone away. And
yeah,
every time it's mentioned, it just brings up this whole thing, which is that big rock
yeah,
of questioning the ethics of Justin Trudeau in particular, and then the people around him and his fellow travelers. I mean, this has been going on for a while, and that's what
yeah,
Canadians generally accept. They don't know enough about Pierre Poilievre to have those kinds of views, and they don't know who's around him. That really don't know very much. But then the real issue is that's a problem, but the other one is fatal, and that's that inability of the Liberal government to actually connect in a meaningful way to demonstrate to Canadians that they're going to make their lives actually easier and better and more hopeful. Remember, Justin Trudeau came in on a wave of hope
yeah.
in 2015, and he was going to be there for the
Anyway,
middle class, and those who aspire to join it. Well, that's actually who's turned against him.
yeah.
Who's
Because the
turned against him.
promise is the other implication or the other impact of people experiencing the affordability crisis is the the single focus of this government on environmental issues represented by the carbon tax. But that seems to be also breaking down. Look, if we can't afford to pay the rent or put food on the table, and I'm worried about my grandmother and my son because, they can't afford to go anywhere, live anywhere, or eat anything, then the notion that we should be, paying a huge price to save something that we're not sure these policies are actually saving, um, that becomes, that deal that people had kind of engaged in and agreed to, however reluctantly, seems to be really breaking down.
Well, that's because the urgent has pushed out the important.
Yeah. Okay. Exactly.
So it's not that people don't think that the environment and climate change are important. Canadians deeply care about the environment and climate change, but it's difficult to worry about it when you can't you don't believe that your life is getting any better. I
Yeah.
mean, so what's happened is for all your listeners and viewers who are went to undergraduate in university, you probably remember Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Right.
right? So at the top is self-actualization, making the world a better place. At the bottom is survival.
Yeah.
What's happened is our gaze has moved, and our view of what the future is no longer 10 years from now. It's 10 days.
Yeah.
And in that kind of a context, it's difficult to get people to understand why they have to spend their scarce resources on dealing with an issue that they think is important, but they don't think is going to come crashing down on them tomorrow.
Yeah.
But the mistake would be for people to think that Canadians don't think it's important. They actually do.
Yeah, I think that's a really important distinction because I think we all care. I think we all have that sense. But when it's become such a binary choice, right? That, either you've got to pay the carbon tax and it's going to go up in April and we're going to make you shut off the heat and the light, and you're going, well, the heat and the light might get shut off anyway because I can't afford it. Then it becomes a very different matter, right?
Yeah, and the argument on the other side of this is, well, you get these rebates, and from the very beginning, this has been, because I've done a lot of work on it. It's been very confusing to people. Hold on a second. You're going to take money from me and you're going to give it back.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah. No, it's absolutely.
Why? Like, how does this make any sense? Like, I like getting the money back. That's good,
Yeah. But it was
but
my money.
why are you doing this?
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make any in a common sense way. If you just sit down and you try to explain this to somebody who isn't from Canada, who has
Yeah.
cares about the environment or whatever, and you sit down and you try to explain it to them, their answer would be, so this is supposed to be a disincentive to drive more and
Yeah.
do this, and oh, by the way, if you live in Atlantic Canada, you get a special dispensation,
Yeah.
and how does this make any sense? So that's what's happened. It's kind of become the context has changed from what was when it was in 2019, when this was a big issue in the election campaign. So it's changed since then. The context has changed. People now have experience with it. They don't see the environment getting any better or the climate getting any better. We still have, every year, people talking about climate causing forest fires and climate causing flooding and all the rest of it. Well, we've had the carbon tax. Okay, so how come none of this is
Yeah.
getting any better?
It's
So what
not
happens
changing.
is this all falls in on itself,
Yeah.
and that's what's happened.
Well, and the other thing is that, the triggers for people, when you read that the government has grown by 40% in terms of the number of public servants, and that they don't want to go to work 3 days a week. And I know these are gross generalizations, but again, it comes back to it's broken, it's not working. Why are you creating a new bureaucracy, as you say, to take my money and then give it back to me, right? Like, we could maybe save on some expenditures if we didn't do it that way.
Well, if you're part of the Laurentian elite, this all makes sense
Yeah.
because they understand how Ottawa works, and they
Yeah.
understand that the people there have big hearts and they're doing great things on behalf of Canadians. And if we have more of them, they'll even do greater things with bigger hearts on behalf of Canadians. And then there's all the people who have to pay for it, who don't understand how Ottawa works, don't understand what they get out of it. And it seems like a party that's going on for these people in Ottawa that they haven't been invited to, and that they can take their real money and send it to Ottawa, and it turns into Canadian Tire money by the time it gets there.
Right.
And so this is the problem, especially for people who consider voting Conservative.
Yeah. So the other question I wanted to ask about is timing, because, the government is arguing, and as are, the facts to some degree, that, the interest rates are coming down and that will start to tame inflation, or at least the rate at which inflation's been growing. And we see them making the same argument in the United States, but there seems to be a lag between the world actually changing and people experiencing things getting better, because the sense is Canadians aren't feeling that at all, regardless of what the politicians say, that it's getting better.
So one of the things I've learned from all the polling that we do worldwide over the space of the last couple of years, and watching the U.S. election has been very instructive because we're very busy there, is that the pain on the way down is not compensated for. The political pain on the way down is not compensated for by the political benefit on the way up. So
Yeah.
the pain on the way down is way disproportionate to the benefit, compared to the benefit on the way up. So governments tend to get blamed for things; they don't necessarily get credit for them. And in the United States, it's really interesting. And it's similar to Chrysler Freeland getting up in the House and saying, you don't realize how good you've got it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a similar argument that the Democrats are making, except when you go out and you talk to Americans about were you better off, personally and financially when Trump was in power, when Biden was in power, they say when Trump was in power. At least a significant number of them do. So this is the situation. I mean, if we should ask, maybe we'll do this at Ipsos, were you better off with Trudeau in power? Or were you better off with Harper in power?
Yeah.
And my expectation is probably people, at least 50%, will at least say Harper, and that's enough. I mean, you form a majority in this country with 40.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is what they're up against.
Let's just talk. I know we're going to do it a little bit later on with your colleagues in the US, but what we're seeing stateside, what you think might be messages here. I mean, we've got in a way both Harris and Trudeau as incumbents trying to present themselves as the agents of change. We can't go back, says Harris, and that would be, to her own government, but they're trying to hearken back to Trump and hear the same thing, that, we're hearing echoes of that. I mean, actually, I heard the Prime Minister say it, we can't go back, referencing the Conservatives. Well, that was 10 years ago, is it just too simplistic an approach? He's seeing Harris kind of turn the game a little bit, so he's going to try it. Are there any things that you read from Biden actually with a bit of a gun to his head, saying, "Okay, I'll step aside. That's what's in the best interest." What messages are really there?
The whole brat campaign of joy kind of thing that came
Yeah.
out of the U.S. There's just none of that here.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a unidimensional focus in this election campaign in Canada when it comes, and it's change.
Yeah.
In the United States, there's at least a conversation about, do you want to change back to that? That's legitimate because
Right.
the previous guy's actually running.
Yeah.
Stephen Harper is not on the ballot in
Yes,
Canada,
exactly. Yeah.
and you've been in power for 10 years. So it's a much more difficult thing to do. And the thing that I'm having a harder time parsing out in the United States is, okay, so in our polling, Kamala Harris is probably 3 to 4 points ahead nationwide. In the battleground states, it's very, very close.
Yeah.
So what bringing her into the race did was got the Democrats back into the game, but not in a way in which there's huge enthusiasm more than there is just relief that
Yeah.
they've actually got somebody in the race who can make something happen. And they went through their whole convention, and for a certain group of the American population, that the messages that were going out through that, the people who were involved send one signal to one group of Americans and then send another signal to another group of Americans.
Yeah.
So she didn't come out of that with this huge, gigantic wave of appeal in which she's completely changed the dynamics that any non-Biden candidate would have changed relative to Donald Trump. Pardon me. So it is a very competitive race. Not really any signals that I can see coming out of it that really relate to anything in Canada. So when I see people say, "Oh, the Liberals or the NDP are about joy or whatever," it's like that's kind of not really matching the mood.
Yeah. Yeah,
I
I
find
think,
I find, Senator, that the politicians that do the best job in election campaigns are those that are synchronous with the prevailing public mood.
yeah.
If you're hopeful, go hopeful. If you want change and you're negative about what's going on, if you're negative about change, that's where they want to be. And if you're not synchronized with that, it just looks a little it looks a little insane, to be honest. It looks like you're
Yeah.
just not listening.
Just not listening. So the whole theory of, if the government does fall and we get ourselves into an election campaign, that it gives the prime minister an opportunity to campaign against Trump and try and connect Poilievre, and like that's just not going to work. We are actually seeing starkly two different countries with two different mindsets and two different political systems, and you can't translate.
If you're a progressive voter, this will resonate.
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
Okay, but you're already probably doing that. The
Yeah.
only choice on the progressive voter side is, do I vote NDP or do I vote Liberal or do I stay home?
Hmm.
It's not like they're considering voting for Pierre Poilievre right now.
Yeah. We've had a lot of discussions with people stateside who've been writing about this, and it's true here too that the cleavages in this country, the right left, the rural urban, um, is really being replaced wherever you live and however you vote with class interests. And that's becoming stronger. I think we see it more directly in the US and how the parties have kind of flipped, and the Republicans are becoming the voice of the working man and working person, and the Democrats a little bit more of the intellectuals and the elites. What's going on here? The cleavages here where it's not linguistic or geographic or you know, traditional fault lines. Where are we?
Well, the left has basically abandoned the concept of class as the primary definition of oppression. So their primary definition of oppression these days is around identity, and so you see that all over the place. It's not really a huge driver of voting intention right now. Really, what is the biggest driver of voting intention in Canada right now is more geographic, and I would say,
Explain that a little bit.
well, there's really two ways that you can win elections in Canada now. There's the Laurentian Elite way, which is the old Laurentian calculus way, which is the way the Liberals won forever, and frankly, that's how Justin Trudeau won,
Yeah,
which is you win a bit in Atlantic Canada, you win enough in urban Quebec in particular, and urban Ontario, including the suburbs, the 905, that you can win enough seats to at least form a minority government. So there's the old Laurentian Elite way of winning. This, by the way, and the reason I say Laurentian Elite rather than Liberal is because that's how Brian Mulroney won too.
yeah, yeah,
Except he was able to put together Quebec with the big parts of Ontario along with the West.
yeah,
He was unique in
yeah, totally.
that. Stephen Harper developed another way, which was I'm going to win by not necessarily winning in the downtowns and not necessarily winning in Quebec, but I'm going to put together the suburbs, the car commuting suburbs, with Western Canada and rural and small town Canada. So I'm going to win there. And the way the population has shifted, which is why John Ibbitson and I wrote that book, The Big Shift, that's what the
Yeah,
shift is. The weight of the population has moved from Ontario to the west, and the parts of the country that aren't growing as fast are Quebec and Atlantic Canada. So what's happened is over time, increasingly, and it will through the course of the century, Western Canada and the car commuting suburbs are going to be a bigger weight in the election. So what Pierre Poilievre is facing right now is a very similar situation to Stephen Harper, but even better because there's been a redistribution of seats since then, and the West has picked up more, car commuting suburbs have picked up more, and that coalition is available to him. And again, just as it did for Stephen Harper, although the NDP also played a role for Stephen Harper, which was that in the province of Quebec, not as material to the outcome of the election campaign for the Conservatives as it was for the Liberal Party. So Stephen Harper, when he won in 2011, when he won his majority, won only 11 seats. I mean, probably Pierre Poilievre is going to do better than that, but he's not going to form his government out of there. He's going to form his government out of winning the car commuting suburbs of Ontario, along with the car commuting suburbs of other cities, particularly going into West, small town, and rural Canada. And it will be quite a comfortable majority.
So I think you have made it abundantly clear, as has every pollster and almost every, anybody who analyzes this, that the jig is up, that there will in fact be a change of government. So it's just a question of the timing, and I think all of the points you've made really lean to sooner as opposed to later for everybody's varied but specific interests in terms of how they succeed politically.
Well, I'm a chorus of one on the fact that I never thought the prime minister was going to run again, and thinking that he was a logical individual, and the idea that he could be thinking of the way I kind of picture him these days, it's kind of like Leonidas going to the Hawk Gates with the 300 behind him, taking on the Persian hordes. And to which well, we're going to go out, we're going to fight them. It's like, yeah, but they all died. The Persians won. I mean, it's kind of like that kind of situation, really illogical. And I thought that that he's stubborn, but he's not obtuse.
Yeah.
He understands political calculus. I didn't know stubborn would be bigger than
Yeah.
the other part.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but the ability for him to leave may be gone because he may end up in an election campaign next week.
Yeah. And if not, they try and do the deal, stretch it out as Quebec tries to get get a larger chunk of the pie. That's just going to alienate people even further. We've been watching that for decades, right?
And people, by the way, who were voting for the Conservatives.
Yeah, yeah. So
And so one more
that.
reason, it adds up to nothing good for the Liberal Party. So I don't know why anybody would roll the dice on a 20-point deficit.
Yeah, it
I
is.
know why the opposition parties should make them do it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But Yves Blanchette could say, "Oh, we're going to get something for Quebec." Well, he can also get it from the Tories too.
Exactly right.
I mean, there's lots of negotiations to take place here potentially.
Yeah.
But
so he doesn't need to save them at this point. Yeah.
No, the opposition parties, they want to go against Justin Trudeau.
Right, of course.
I mean, the Liberals think they're his best chance, as he's actually the opposition party's best chance.
This was Trump's problem. His whole campaign was about defeating Joe Biden, not Kamala Harris, right?
Yeah, and so if they give him a chance to hang around and set the timing of an election, any government in our parliamentary system, the single biggest tool that it has, the single biggest, is control of the timing of the election.
Yeah.
That's the single biggest advantage they have, because they can use the machinery of government to get them in the best possible place to call an election. When you take that away from them, they're incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
The NDP, the Bloc Québécois, and the Conservative Party have taken that away from the Liberals. Yeah, why would they give it back? Why would you give it back to them?
They live or die at somebody else's behest. That is exactly right.
And for the NDP, is Jagmeet Singh? Is he Jack Layton? Does he see his party as being the replacement?
Yeah.
As the progressive champion in Canada.
And can he make that case with credibility? That's the issue, right?
Now's your chance.
Yeah.
And for the Bloc Québécois, what do you have to fear? Because if the Conservatives win in the next election campaign, very good chance that you're going to win the majority of seats in the province of Quebec. They're going to have to deal with you.
Yeah.
And not only that, the Péquistes are leading in the provincial polling too. So
correct.
Look for that to come back.
Yeah. No, exactly. That this is exactly the circumstances, the brew in which that happens. This is going to be one for the books, in terms of the pollsters, the political scientists, the everyone looking back and saying, "How the hell did this happen?" Right?
I
How did,
told you it happens two ways,
yeah,
by intention or by accident.
yeah.
And this one, I'm 50-50.
Yeah, no, I'm with you exactly. Darrell, great to talk to you as always, and I can't imagine we won't be back to you really soon to ask some questions about
It
what
would,
Canadians are thinking.
it would be my pleasure, Senator.
Right. Darrell Bricker, CEO of Ipsos Public Affairs, Senior Fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs, and he served honorably as an honorary colonel in the military with the Queen's York Rangers for many years, and that's a passion we share as well. So thank you for that service, in addition to the work you do every day. We will talk soon. Thanks.
Thanks, Senator.
And thanks to all of you for joining us today, and we'll talk to you very soon again, too. That's it for No Nonsense with Pamela Wallin.